The GPS DairyCAST features the high-value insights of the GPS Dairy Consulting team's trusted advisors and the owners and managers from the elite dairy farms they serve. These conversations deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders.
Hello and welcome to the GPS DairyCAST. I'm Peggy Coffeen from the Up-Level Dairy Podcast, serving as your host. And on this GPS DairyCAST, we are coming to you from the 2024 GPS Leaders Forum. And joining me for this episode is GPS team member Robb Bender, as well as featured speaker from the conference, Normand St. Pierre, Professor Emeritus at The Ohio State University. And they'll be having a conversation on the topic of milk pricing in America. And they'll be covering some of the most misunderstood aspects of the current milk marketing system and talking about what it will take to really fix the US federal milk marketing order. Hear all that and more today on this GPS DairyCAST.
Dr. St. Pierre, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your presentation. I wanted to start by just asking, in general, milk pricing is very confusing. Dairy producers sometimes struggle to understand. Can you sort of give us the high-level overview of how milk is priced in the United States?
Okay, there's two ways it is priced. You have about 2/3 of the milk that is priced through the federal milk marketing orders, legislation that dates back to the 1930s. And about 1/3 is just sold and marketed the way everything else is. The federal milk marketing orders were put in place to create some orderly marketing of milk. And that's part of the problem, as we will be discussing later on. And so they determined, based with the reform that was done in 2000, basically every producer that is shipping in the federal order is paid based on components. It's pounds of butterfat, protein, and other solids. And then you have the PPD, producer price differential, that either adds or subtract from that, that part gets a bit more complicated. But the very basic thing to understand is actually most producers, not all, and not all the time, but most producers would lower their milk check by adding water to the bulk tank because it's pound. So when you go in a herd and they say the cows are milking well and we're at 27,000 pounds of milk, I just want to know how many pounds of butterfat, protein, and other solid. The other solids don't pay quite as much, but generally it's a positive flow, and that's it. And so from a producer standpoint, focus on pounds of butterfat, protein, and other solids, especially butterfat and protein. That's where the money's being made.
Yep. Okay. So I think that the dairy producers I run across, I think they understand they're predominantly getting paid on pounds of fat, pounds of protein. I think that's understood, maybe not how that's determined. But can you, based on your comments, can you talk about in a high level, what are the problems with milk pricing in the U.S.? What are the problems that you see that need to be addressed?
Well, that will be, the fundamental problem is we have a system that is based to how the world was in the 1930s. And you had millions of dairy producers. The average herd size was 10 cows, milking 25 pounds per day. And you didn't have a highway system. So milk was produced locally. And so at the onset there, you had over 100 milk marketing orders to basically organize how the milk was going to be priced in a given area, and the milk was not moving around there. And then when you really look at it, that's the fundamental problem, is that you're trying to build and adjust something that was designed for a complete different era. So the problem that we have, you have the reform in 2000. So now suddenly the government got out of pricing the milk. They calculate the price. Before that, you had the price support. Well, the price support brought in that in the early 1980s, milk was $13 a hundredweight. That was determined by the government because it was basically saying we will buy an unlimited amount of dairy product at those prices that were equating to $13 milk.
Okay.
So at that point, what it meant from a co-op, you don't have to invest in marketing. Anything you can't sell, you just call 800 CCC, Commodity Credit Corporation, they will buy it. And so at some point, the government was storing more dairy products than anywhere else in the world. They were trying to give away the cheese and finally realized we have to get out of that business. So they did first reduce the price support to $9.60 it was at one point, and now it's completely out. Since 2000, the government does not intervene in dairy prices. So when you talk outside of the dairy industry and people think that dairy is still supported, it is not, no more than chicken or anything else, all right? So in 2000, what determines the price is at what price the products that you make out of the milk, except fluid, at what price do they sell? And then you calculate backwards. For example, one that's really easy to understand. In butter, all you have is butter, fat, and water. So if you give me the price of butter, take out the make allowance. We might talk about that in a minute.
Yeah.
Take out the make allowance, and then figure out how much fat you have in the butter, and then you will be figuring out what's the value, the price of the butter fat.
Okay.
So that's how it works for all the components. There's 4 commodities that are used to price everything: butter, block of cheddar cheese, barrel of cheddar cheese, and whey. And that determines the price of the 3 components.
Okay.
And all of that is based on that. The problem that it arises from that is it's all priced backwards. That is, tomorrow, well, because we're Tuesday night right now, tomorrow afternoon, the federal marketing order will release the price that would be enforced for November, because we're in December.
Sure.
So I have the
Yep.
wrong month.
Yep.
It's the only thing that I know. I've traveled around the world, I've looked at different things in pricing commodities. Name me something when you have a sale happening, and you have a buyer and a seller, and they haven't agreed on a price. You
Right.
check in at a hotel. Now, imagine you check at a hotel, give you the key, and they say, we'll send you the bill next month. We don't know what price it's going to be. It wouldn't happen,
Yeah.
but we have that in dairy. And that's another fundamental problem that you have.
Yep. Very good. Okay, so you alluded to the make allowance. Can you give me a little bit more detail on what the make allowance is,
Yeah.
where it's coming from?
And that one is pretty easy because basically the system works that to price the components, like for example, butter, there's the butter fat in there, but to move from milk to making butter, somebody had to pay, it costs something to
Sure.
make. The make allowance is the calculated cost it takes to transform the milk into butter. And it's the same way with non-fat dry milk, the same way with whey, and so that's critical, because if the make allowance is too small, and that's what we have right now, what it means is if I'm a handler, that's how in the language, that's a processor. Let's say
Okay.
I'm making butter. And they say I'm supposed to make the butter for 17 cents per pound of butter, and instead it cost me 25 cents. Well, what it means then is I will not pool the milk. The pooling is for everything but class 1. The pooling is voluntary. It's not mandatory. Class
Okay.
1 is mandatory. If you put milk in a bottle, that has to be declared. It has to go completely through the federal order. That was supposed to be bringing order to the system. But if I'm a butter maker, now I will be paying the milk based on the components, but if the make allowance, if it costs me more to produce the pound of butter than the make allowance, I'm guaranteeing myself I'm going to lose money.
Sure.
Well, I may as well not pool and then just see what milk I can find at whatever price I can find. And that explains why you have this accrued pooling and depooling ongoing. That's part of it. And part of that also is the system was designed at a time where really you should have a declining price between class 1, class 2, class 3, and class 4, because that's about the order that the products can be stored, the length of time. But it doesn't work that way anymore, because by the time you have a cheese plant pooling, getting 10 million pounds of milk per day, they're not going to stop producing solely because, the milk is a little bit more expensive.
Sure.
They're just going to depool. That is, if by depooling, I'm going to get my milk supply cheaper than what I would pay through the regulations, it's an incentive to depool. A lot of that happens within cooperatives. And I'm not blaming the co-ops. If I'm ahead of a given co-op, I have to depool then. If the class 4 is so much higher than class 3, it really means if I depool, I can steal the milk from the class 3 cheaper.
Right.
And then my co-op is supposed to be making more money that way, because I should be paying $20 for my milk. I'm only paying $17. I make the same butter. I sell it for the price the federal government says. So I'm making the co-op more profitable. Mm-hmm. That means I should be paying higher dividends to producers. Well, that's about like wishing you send $1 to Washington, $1 will come back. And that's part of the problem.
Sure.
But again, I don't blame the co-op. They're playing the role that they're being imposed into.
So you were talking about make allowances. Do the make allowances change month to month, or is
No,
it set in
no,
stone?
and that,
Yeah.
see, and it's a real gigantic process. The modernization thing, the federal government, really the USDA thought they were gonna get 2 proposals, the hearing would last 2 weeks. It started, in August, and it ended up in February, and they had 21, 22 proposals of different things. The make allowances had not been revised for, I think it was 2008 the last time.
Okay.
And so, right now, there's no question they are too low. It costs more to transform the milk into the products. And so it's an incentive to depool regardless of anything. So that has to be adjusted. Producers have to understand that with this system, if you're going to accept that, it really means you have to make allowances to a level where an average handler at that level will at least make a little bit of money out of it.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. You referenced PPD. This is something that dairy producers, I think, often don't understand, or it's tough to understand. Can you give us a little bit of a description around what
Well,
PPD is?
Yes, producer price differentials. It's the most misunderstood thing in the whole pricing thing. Because if you go back before year 2000, it wasn't quite that, but if I say it was basically the apportioning of the bonuses from the class 1, the extra value of the class 1.
Okay.
Because class 3 and class 4 was priced the same then, all right? And so what you had, there was just a bit of difference because of the different timing.
Okay.
The prices are not get at the same point in time. But if you think, for example, here in the upper Midwest, and if you're in an area of $1.80 of price differential, and if 10% of the milk goes to class 1, the PPD in the old days would have been about 18 to 20 cents per hundredweight over the whole pool. So that's pretty easy. It's no longer that. The PPD is just producers are paid. Remember I said the base price that everybody's paid for is pound of butter fat, pound of protein, pound of butter solid times their respective price. So let's say you do that, and for the standard milk in the federal order, which is 3.5% butter fat, 2.99% protein, 5.69% other solid. We just say you have a lousy producer, because if that's what your milk
Right,
is today,
yeah.
you should fire the nutritionist. But that's what you produce, and let's say it's $22. So
Yep.
that's what goes to the producer. The handlers, the only guys that are paying for the 3 components are the cheesemakers. Class 1 doesn't pay. Class 1 pays for butter fat and pays for skim. Actually, it's the only place where water is paid for. Class 3 pays for the component. Class 2 doesn't. Class 2 pays for butter fat and the non-fat solid.
Yeah,
And Class
okay.
4 pays for butter fat and non-fat solid. So let's say that the Class 4, the butter fat and non-fat solid is at $20 equivalent, and the Class 3 is at, like I said, 22. So the producer gets 22. The administrator, think of the pool, it's just money that's being exchanged. The milk doesn't go
Yeah,
through that,
yeah.
but it doesn't have any money, it doesn't have any mattress. The federal order doesn't have money. It just, so what comes in must match what goes out. And so the PPD there is trying to reconcile the money coming in from the 4 classes
Okay.
that gets in the pool. So you can think of the average of those 4 tempered by their respective usage versus what the base price of the producers are.
Okay.
And so that's why you can have some inordinate negative PPDs nowadays. In the old days, that did not exist, but nowadays you can have that. If class 3 is priced so much higher than class 1, 2, and 4, you're going to have PPD that are negative $4.
Yeah.
Because the guy that are handling the milk, that are putting in the bottle, that are making yogurt, and are making butter, are only paying $17. And the class 3 is at 22. So the market administrator is basically getting only $17 from the 3 other pools. And like I said, it has to balance. You just balance the book and put the negative PPDs.
Is it fair to say the system really wasn't designed to handle that big a disparity in prices? It was never designed to have
Was
that
not.
negative.
Like I said, it was designed that class 1 would be higher than class 2 because it's more perishable, the cottage cheese and things. That would be a bit higher. That's why they add 70 some cents per hundredweight. And then you'd have the class 3 and 4. Class 3 a little bit higher than class 4. You have some fine cheese and things. But they should, class 3 and 4, there's no reason that they shouldn't be. They're all products that you can store for a fair amount of time, except the fresh cheese. But typically it should be within 25 cents a hundredweight.
Sure.
But again, that's when you had thousands of cheese plants and butter plants. That was a different era. Now you go to a cheese plant, they handle 10 million pounds of milk per day arriving in.
Right.
7 days a week, 24 hours, it just runs and runs and runs. And so you're going to have large disparity. What we call in economics, the elasticity of things have really changed over time also. So what it means is right now you end up having a large disparity between class 3 and class 4. Because of the surge, it's not as much the surge, actually it's not at all the surge in butter price that makes the class 4 higher than class 3. Zero. The butter fat in class 3 and 4 is paid the same.
Okay. Yeah.
The difference is, what it means is the non-fat solids in class 4 is priced higher than the equivalent of the protein and other solids in class 3. I will be showing a slide with that. And that is driven by the price of whey and the price of cheese versus the price. Yeah. Non-fat dry milk right now receive actually a really good price. That's what really it means. We're good at exporting. We've always been good at exporting the non-fat dry milk, but we're really getting, the US getting really good at it. Our price is very favorable right now. In terms of dairy products right now, you look at the big exporters, the European Union, the United States, and New Zealand. And right now, across the board, except for whole milk powder, which we don't make, the rest of them, we're the bargain place.
Okay.
Even butter. Our butter price has dropped so much that we're 25 to 50 cents cheaper than Europe and New Zealand. Now, it doesn't mean that suddenly the phone's going to ring and people are going to want to have our butter. There's long-term contracts in there. But I would really want the producers to understand that's been also a very, very different time where the federal order system was put basically to regulate domestic milk. And now we have 17, 18% of the solids being produced that are being exported that are not part of that calculation of things. And in fact, producers should be really happy that we can export that, because imagine if we weren't exporting 17% of our solids, what do you think the price of milk would be? And the growth is going to be there. And I've traveled around the world, and I cannot think of a better place to make milk than in this country. New Zealand has no capacity to increase because they're pasture-based. They are grazing everything that they can graze. Australia is done. Europe is a mess of rules and regulations. And then look after that around the world. Argentina could, but Argentina shoots itself in the foot politically every 10 years. Canada could. Canada really could. But Canada's too stupid. They just decided to have and I'm Canadian. I can say that. In Canada, you could have the western plains of Canada, and especially people really think about global warming. That's going to be a hell of a good place to have cows. It's be like North Dakota, but it's not going to happen. And so the U.S. is the place where, actually there was a study made by the IFC, an international organization that's based in Germany, and they look, where's the milk going to be coming from in 50 years from now? And most of the growth is from the U.S.
Okay.
And they're really Eurocentrics. I thought they were going to say Germany or Poland or something. And
I'm sure our producers will love to hear that, I think,
Yeah, it is. But what it means then is you're going to have to, first you're going to have to abide to international standards.
Okay.
So that's always a problem, because our butter is not quite the same as the international butter. We make non-fat dry milk, and the world trade in skim milk powder, and it is tiny differences. All of that, the U.S. is adjusting, but as long as we don't get too Yankee-centric, we're going to be able to play there. On the cheese side, I don't think we have any claim into the very fine cheese. Leave that to the French. People want to pay $16 a pound for cheese. Let them have that, maybe. But the world is growing in what we could call the commodity cheese, the mozzarella, the cheddar, and so forth. It's an excellent food, and the skim milk powder.
Yeah, good.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want to learn more about GPS Dairy Consulting, make sure to join our email list. Our announcements aren't just for GPS clients, but instead for anyone looking to advance their dairy business. Learn more about GPS and take a deeper dive into dairy farming hot topics. Stay in the loop with our once weekly emails and have all GPS DairyCast podcasts, blog posts, event announcements, and monthly newsletters sent straight to your inbox. You can join the GPS email list by clicking the link in the show notes.
So I want to go a little bit of a different direction. We were talking about FMMOs before.
Yep.
So what are the problems with FMMOs? I think you alluded to some of them. I don't know if you want to get into it a little bit.
There really is, and the problem is an antiquated system, and it's based, my whole point, which is not going to be necessarily popular, is basically you're trying to fix an old Ford in an era of electric vehicles. And
Yeah.
so the whole thing should be abandoned. Now, I'm not saying it should be abandoned abruptly, but it may be progressively, but it should be abandoned. There's no reason. Now, I'm told, well, milk is perishable. Well, what about tomatoes and lettuce? They're highly perishable. Lettuce, you have actually nothing, at least tomatoes, you can make ketchup and make tomato
Sure,
sauce.
yeah.
But lettuce, you have nothing. There's not a head of lettuce in the Salinas Valley that is planted unless it has a market in 6 weeks from now.
Okay.
And so you have coordination of markets. And that doesn't happen in dairy. And that's why the co-op has to go, then they put some rules, you cannot produce any more than that. So you have an obsolete system, which in my mind cannot be fixed. You have to get the federal government out of that. Now, if some states after that, for example, under the current conditions, I do believe that there would not be any milk produced in Florida if you didn't have the federal milk marketing order system. Now, if the state of Florida decides that having some dairy farm is important, they can do what some other countries are doing. You go in Switzerland, and they do put some mechanism and system.
Some sort of subsidy or something?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
they don't subsidize the milk. And interestingly, they subsidize the painting and the beautiful things that the tourists can go around. And I'm not saying that Florida should be doing that, but what it is leave it to the states then to decide whether
Sure.
to give an industry, because that's what the states will do anyway in everything else. No, like right now in data processing, the states are competing to attract the big data processing and that, because there's job and taxes and so forth coming in. Let them decide in Florida whether it's worth keeping the dairy industry there or not. And we can figure it out. Otherwise, the milk will flow. They will get the milk that you need. There's no question about that. Fundamentally, though, there's some of the issues. I'll go quickly through that. First,
Yep.
It puts all the risk burden, almost all of it, on producers. When you really look into that, it really is. And then you say, well, if you have risk, you can hedge. Well, tell me how, if you're a producer, you're going to be hedging. Because to know the components, you would have to be hedging 4 commodities. And that's going to, now you're going to be hedging your base, right? Your
Yeah,
base price. How the hell are you going to hedge the PPD? You would have to know the utilization of the milk in that order for that month. Good Lord, guessing that one. And so now you have a risk of easily $2 per hundredweight on the PPDs
Okay.
that you cannot hedge. So the risk is passed to the producers. The order put an additional value to class 1. And if you really rethink about that, it's like a cultural thing. Historically, because you couldn't move the milk and it's perishable, well, is it still true today? A plant, again, that processes into cheese 10 million pounds of milk has as much dependency on getting the milk in the plant as a bottling plant.
Sure.
They will compete for the milk, and whoever is willing to pay for it will
Right.
get the darn milk, because
Right.
the milk will move. And that one is pretty hidden. I say it's kind of indirect. It curbs innovation. I give the example. Let's say if I have a drinking yogurt. Is it class 1 or class 2? And they're going to fight over this.
Sure.
And then it's going to
Okay.
take 3 years, and so if you're a small business, you want to get into that mess? I've alluded earlier, the back pricing.
Yeah.
So, again, tomorrow, we're going to know what producers will be paid for their components in the month of November. And we know that in December.
Right.
And we won't know the PPDs until 10 days later.
Yeah.
I don't know of anything else in the whole world where somebody is selling something and doesn't know what the hell he's going to be getting for. And that's a fundamental
pretty big problem. Yeah.
And so you go through that whole list. Now, it brings also a conflict of interest by cooperative. And again, I know they don't want to tarnish them. They play a double role in there. They're both producers. So with the monetization, there's going to be block voting. A cooperative is going to vote for all its members.
Okay.
So they're both, and actually on the federal order system, the cooperative is the producer. But they're also a handler. So what are they today?
Yeah.
So it puts them in this dual role that I'm glad I don't work for one of them, because at times who do you really work for? Your members, or you work for the co-op to
Sure.
the balance sheet?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the explanation. So I'll maybe close with a question, and I don't know if this is a totally fair one you're willing to answer, but how do you fix the system? What
I
are
think
the
I
reforms?
alluded to that, and again, I'm afraid I'm going to be tarred and feathered tomorrow, because you grew up with this. It's the same as a politician saying we need to reform Social Security,
Right.
and we better, because our kids ain't going to have a darn penny left if it keeps going at this rate, but nobody wants to touch it. In this case, I just say, at least gradually get out of it and let the markets operate. And today, think about the electronics, the way we can move things so efficiently, and let the markets operate. Just make sure that there's no collusion. So you're still going to have oversight, like in any other industries, to make sure there's no collusion, there's no people that capture so much of a local or regional market that it become a monopoly. But as long as after that, let the markets operate. Free markets they can be pretty cruel, but they're darn efficient.
Sure. Well, perfect. Dr. St. Pierre, thanks for your time, and thanks for your willingness to share your knowledge. This was insightful. I appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome.
You just heard from GPS team member Robb Bender, as well as Norman St. Pierre here on the GPS DairyCast. I'm your host, Peggy Coffeen from the Uplevel Dairy Podcast, and thanks for listening to the GPS DairyCast.
The GPS DairyCast features conversations that deliver on the GPS Dairy Consulting promise to inspire change and grow leaders. If this GPS DairyCast has you looking for more ways to become an elite dairy producer, find more information in our show notes on how you can add a GPS advisor to your team.